Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest 20 things you didn't know about video. Once again, I'm just doing this here to showcase how this playlist will feature videos going forward. And in this case, I'm going to talk about a very famous and popular film, one that's definitely a fan favorite. I've seen this film a multitude of times. I'm sure you have too. It's been an influence for so many people, both making films, writing films. Even to this day, there's so many fans for it, and some good news associated with a potential sequel sometime soon. But it has to do with this. Of course, I'm talking about Heat. Definitely a really great, really fantastic film. One of those films that you can just watch over and over again and catch new things. And so I wanted to talk about 20 things you didn't know about with regards to this movie. And in doing my research, even now, I'm still finding out brand new items that are fascinating stuff. So can't wait to showcase it here. So as always, these are just in no particular order. And then I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on them too. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start. Number one is this. When the film first came out on VHS, this was shortly after the film finally finished everything as far as its theatrical release. By the way, it did pretty well when it came out in theaters. It was one of those films where it had quote unquote legs. So in other words, it didn't have that much of a strong opening, but word of mouth eventually gave the film a long-lasting time when it came to box office results. And so finally, when it came to VHS release at the time back in 1995, that's when it also gathered a whole set of other new fans. I know on my end, I found out about Heat the first time whenever I was able to rent the movie way back when. And at that time, that's when I saw it there on VHS, regular pan and scan. In fact, this urban legend ties to it. So when people were watching the film on VHS, and because of that ugly pan and scan stuff, you know what I'm talking about, right? It was that forced zoom in when it came to scenes, and that way you couldn't necessarily see most of the scene, like to the left and right. Usually it was just the middle stuff. Well, that prominent scene in the middle of the film showcasing Al Pacino finally meeting Robert De Niro, you couldn't see them together in one place. This is because, again, of that ugly pan and scan issue. Instead, it would look like it would feature one actor on one end and then cut to the other actor on the other end, but never within the same shot. So there was an urban legend, short one at least, that people were thinking there was there even something filmed between them? Like, was, in other words, something filmed with one actor and then something else afterward? Of course, later on with DVD, that clarified things 100%, but at least for a time, I remember there was that urban legend. Number two is this. It has to do with Al Pacino's character known as Vincent Hanna. One trait that was rumored for him as well, and if you pay close attention, there's good proof on this. I mean, you can't really just discard this outright. There's the idea that he actually had a cocaine habit. This ties into his manic behavior, the way that he was always like yelling, like at the top of his voice in certain places, and talking in a mile a minute, moving about, very fidgety, like moving very quickly compared to some of the other characters too. This was apparently rumored as well in earlier drafts that he had this cocaine habit. And this also links to one other theory, and that's this, that a lot of his department stuff involving confiscated items and even money that was from robberies and so on, that he in turn was partaking of some of those items. And here's what I mean. If you look closely at the stuff that he's wearing, it definitely stands out compared to the usual, what you would expect range associated with a salary of a detective. Like, for example, the wristwatch that he was wearing in the film was known as a Bulgari Diagano. Hope I'm saying that correctly. Bulgari Diagano. This is a watch that costs about $4,000. Again, that gives you an idea of how expensive that is, right? And then with regards to the suits that he wears throughout the film, there were multiple Armani suits, not to mention the fact that he was living in a very, very fancy house, a large two-story house, which is again there in the expensive area associated with California. So, if you go by that theory, his cocaine habit, the rumored one at least, could be tied to him or others within his department stealing some money associated or other confiscated items within his division. Who would know, right? He's the one that's handling it, and it's coming from robbers and other type of criminals, so necessarily it wouldn't be missed stuff. But again, that's just another rumor that I had seen from before. Number 3 is this. There's 2 interesting things associated with the nefarious character known as Waingro. Waingro was one of the I guess you could call him the main villain within the film itself, although his role is more of a side character too. The first part is this. It's actually based on a real life criminal that was named Waingro. He operated out of the Chicago area, and lo and behold, somewhere along the line, he ended up being a rat and actually ratted out other criminals within that Chicago area. And when that happened, it basically led to him becoming missing. So in other words, the criminals decided finally to take some action, and it was only later on that he was found in northern Mexico, dead, nailed to a wall. So clearly something had happened to him from these criminals, from his actions as far as ratting them out. And it kind of ties into, again, his character in the film, the way he ratted out the main robbers, and ultimately Neil McCauley's character ended up executing him. Number 4 happens to do with the second thing involving Waingro. The main actor playing him, the guy by the name of Kevin Gage, in a weird way of life imitating art and so on, actually ended up going to jail too. So Waingro's character in the film stated that he was coming out of prison and he was already wanting to do some action. While in real life, Kevin Gage actually went to jail too. He was sentenced to 41 months on charges related to cultivating marijuana. So I guess it was like large amounts of marijuana, something along those lines. And another interesting fact was while he was in prison, his character that he played in Heat of Waingro was so popular that the prisoners there did not refer to him under his real name Kevin or Kevin Gage. Instead, they called him as Waingro. So interesting stuff there. Number 5, once again tying into more of life imitating art imitating life, and so on. The film has had a definite impact when it comes to certain scenes. Like, for example, the infamous shootout that was featured within the film, the bank robbery, in other words. This shootout has been analyzed and studied by Marines, by other agencies, by law enforcement as well. It has been looked at as showcasing the proper ways to reload during combat, how quickly you could do so, in other words, how to retreat, how to fire and shoot, and so on. So it's weird that this is the kind of stuff, the scenes, the impact that obviously look amazing on the screen, and the sound associated with them is amazing too. But ultimately, they ended up actually creating influences to other agencies as if they were actual documentaries. Number 6, once again, showcasing life imitating art and so on, was this. Speaking of the bank shootout featuring in the film, this heavily influenced a real-life bank shootout that became known as the North Hollywood Shootout. This occurred on February 28th, 1997. On that day, there was 2 armed gunmen, heavily armed gunmen, and heavily secured gunmen. Like, in other words, they had layers of armor on them, or layers of bulletproof items. This was a guy by the name of Larry Phillips Jr. and another one by the name of Emil Matasaurano. Hope I'm saying that correctly. Emil Matasaurano. They had cased a Bank of America location there in North Hollywood for a good while. They had, just like in the film, meticulously planned it out. They had showcased like where the layouts were going to be, where the parking was, where the hours, even down to knowing when the date was that there was going to be a large shipment of cash there as well to rob, much larger, in other words, than usual. And even afterward, just like in the film, they had a jar full of flammable liquid that was ready to burn their getaway car once everything was finished, and they wanted to get rid of any evidence associated with them. But as it turns out, pure happen chance, on that same day, just as the robbers were about to go into the branch, they were spotted by two police officers who were driving by. Can you imagine that? If it was like a minute later or a minute earlier, they would have had a much better chance of succeeding. But these two police officers saw them immediately, called in an entire robbery, like in other words, that it was happening, and that brought in more squads of cars and police officers. By the time that the two masked, heavily armed gunmen slash robbers came out of the branch, ironically enough, with a lot less cash because of other factors associated with that large amount of cash not being there and some of the branch associates not having the right combinations for certain things. When they came out, they were met by all of these squad cars and police officers, and then there was that intense shootout. In fact, it's theorized, it's not 100% proof, but it's theorized that ultimately more than 2,000 rounds of bullets were fired. Again, just like the film itself from Heat, with the minutes showcasing so many bullets being fired left and right. And then that led to 12 police officers being injured, 8 civilians being injured as well. There was a high-speed chase, if you could call it that, between one of the robbers getting into a car, holding someone briefly hostage, trying to get away. And then ultimately they were just gunned down, like they were shot, and they both ended up dying basically there. One of them was hit, I believe, immediately, like in the head, died instantly. And then the other one bled to death. But ultimately their encounter, like in other words, their robbery of that, or attempted robbery of that Bank of America, and their attempt to get out of there successfully, was 100% influenced by Heat. So interesting stuff there. Number 7, once again, life imitating art and vice versa. There's the characters, the main ones, of Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. In other words, Vincent Hanna and Neil McCauley. They too are based on real life people. There was a real life cat and mouse game that was being done between a Chicago detective by the name of Chuck Adamson and then a career criminal slash robber by the name of Neil McCauley. That was his real name. So in other words, the character that Robert De Niro had in the film, the name Neil McCauley, was based on a robber by the name Neil McCauley. It was the real deal. And they, in turn, had grown to admire each other because during the brief time period that they knew each other, they knew that they were both professionals when it came to their field, especially when it came to the Chicago detective, Chuck Adams. I mean, he realized that Neil McCauley was someone that was very professional in what they did, the meticulous planning that they had as far as his successful robberies and then some attempted ones too. There was even an accidental meeting at a dry cleaning place one day, and at that meeting they decided to go ahead and have a cup of coffee, once again like it was featured within the film. And there they discussed similar dialogues that ultimately was also showcased within that infamous scene. And then there was even an attempted robbery of a store where Neil McCauley was trying to do something there, and then that's when one of the cops that was doing a stakeout, again being led by the detective, Chuck Adamson, he made some noise when he finally decided to go use the restroom. This caused the real-life Neil McCauley to walk away and then decide that something else was amiss, something was going on. Again, tying into directly the information associated with the film. And then ultimately there was another robbery, in this case of a grocery store, that Neil McCauley and his crew tried to do. It was there that the detective, Chuck Adamson, got word that there was going to be that robbery. He in turn had himself and others there from the police force ready to confront them when Neil McCauley and his crew came out. They came out, there was gunshots, and then finally Neil was cornered. Everyone ran off, and then Neil was cornered somewhere in a nearby alleyway, and then ultimately he was shot dead 6 times by Chuck Adamson. So interesting stuff. If you ever wondered how the film does such a great job of showcasing these original characters, think of it this way: they're actually drawn off of real life characters as well. Number 8 is this. Speaking of that infamous coffee scene that I was just mentioning, this film used a restaurant, I guess it was a diner slash cafe, called Kate Mattellini, that was located there in Beverly Hills. This was a real place. You could go there up to a certain point, in fact. After the movie came out, and obviously that scene was so infamous afterward, this restaurant slash diner slash cafe decided to put so many promotional items from the film, like showcasing that, yes, this is the real deal. This is the restaurant that was featured there. And the actual table that you could go to see where Al Pacino and Robert De Niro sat down in was table number 71. It was obviously frequently requested by fans and others who knew stuff about the film. In fact, it was known as the table. Like, that was the one that the waitress and the staff there decided to call it, because everyone wanted to sit at that particular table. You could do so up to a certain point, because the place actually ended up closing in 2014. It was replaced by another business, I believe another restaurant. Someone let me know if that's correct, but things were changed as far as the layout, so it doesn't look like it's there exactly as it was before. Number 9 is this. It happens to do with a neat little treat or trick associated with Neil McCauley's character. If you notice, you might have to look again upon every scene. He wears gray suits. He wears gray suits pretty much throughout the entire film. There's only one notable spot where he doesn't. This was used as a characteristic to apparently hide, to blend in other words, within the environment. I don't know about that 100%. To me, it would seem like a gray suit would stand out more when it comes to that stuff, especially if it's like matching gray on gray with almost like a gray shirt. But apparently that's how it works. And so his character predominantly uses this, except towards the end. You'll notice that whenever he goes and confronts Waingro in that hotel, he switches to that darker suit, the one that was there from, I guess, the employees. And when that happens, he has immediately spotted by Hannah, by Vincent Hanna's character there at the end of the film. Makes one wonder if Neil would have had the gray suit on the entire time, if amongst the crowd, if Vincent Hanna's character would have spotted him. But it gives you the idea of a theory associated with that too. And then, interestingly enough as well, Collateral, that very nice film that was also made by Michael Mann, showcases Tom Cruise's character in very similar gray suits. Again, the idea being that it can be something used to blend within the crowd. And if you want to have another idea of how maybe those two universes, how Heat and Collateral are the same ones, in other words, same Earth, same timeline, and so on, is this: the train station that Neil McCauley's character walks out of at the beginning of Heat is the same train station that Tom Cruise's character dies at the end of Collateral. So think about that next time you're watching both films. Makes you wonder again if that's the same universe that they're in. Number 10 is this. The film, part of its appeal and why it continues to have such a long-lasting admiration is this: it heavily gives minor characters almost entire fleshed out parts. It's almost like there's entire worlds that are available and drawn from these tiny characters, even though some of them are tantamount to nothing more than cameos. You almost get the idea that there is a whole universe behind this characters and the lives that they had and so on. For example, there's Natalie Portman's role as the almost suicidal daughter of Vincent Han. Well, it's not his daughter, but his stepdaughter. And then there's Henry Rollins's small role as well, ultimately as a stoolie, which ends up factoring other actions later on. There's Tom Noonan's role, involving him being that techie, the guy who was able to grab things from the air. You'll see some of the hardware that he's working with, and then his home, and so on. It gives you an idea of what he does. Then there's Ashley Judd's character as the housewife. In other words, she was the one that was there as the spouse for Val Kilmer's character, which ultimately is revealed that she was a former call girl slash someone from Vegas, like in other words, an escort girl, and met Val Kilmer's character there in Las Vegas, and then they decided to stay together. I think the most prominent, though, side character is Jon Voight's mysterious character named Nate. If you think about it, he is actually the true mastermind behind the entire film. Like, he's the one that orchestrated the multiple robberies that were there, and he was also able to use his power and influence to get people slash hired for various items, and then also try to, at the end, try to make sure that everyone is able to escape too. I mean, that's power. What's interesting is that he has all this ability, all this power, and yet he's unknown to Vincent Hanna's character within the film. It's almost like he doesn't even exist, like he's a ghost within it. So makes you wonder, in other words, the level of reach that Nate had, that Jon Voight's character had within the film. If you're wondering too about that, it's actually based on a real life criminal that was named Edward Bunker too. Number 11 is this neat little trait. Next time you see this scene, the infamous scene of Robert De Niro's character looking out into the ocean after he sets that gun, that prominent scene where he sets that gun on the glass table and then looks out into that blue ocean, is based on a painting that you're looking at here that's called Pacific by an artist by the name of Alex Colville. You can see that it's pretty much directly tied to this painting, right down to the shot of him leaning and then looking out into the ocean itself. So nice little homage when it comes to this type of art imitating another form of art too. Number 12 is this. This film was shot pretty much entirely on location. I mean, I read how there were some scenes that were green screen, but they were still shot on location. They just had some green screen for other stuff. But everything was shot there as is, like on actual locations. Nothing that I really know of shot on sound stages. This is important because it tends to add to the authenticity and the look of the film. I mean, this is something where it's a YouTuber slash blogger's dream when it comes to visiting the multitude of locations that are featured within the film. I know because I've seen some of those YouTube videos there. They're out there now. I mean, just look them up and you'll be able to see the real life locations that these scenes were actually filmed in. Fascinating stuff. That's the kind of stuff that I love. If I'm ever there in the Los Angeles area, I'm going to be able to and spend some good time there. You better believe that's going to be something that I would love to do, and of course chronicle within my own YouTube channel here. But you can absolutely go visit these locations. There are multiple websites that showcase the exact addresses. Obviously, with the passage of time, a lot of those addresses have changed as how they look from the film now. Some of them completely changed where they're no longer available at all. But check it out when you have a chance. You'll be able to then see these places. And then number 13, adding more information on a location, is this. The locations basically made the city an entire character in of itself. This is important because you remember what was happening in each scene far more, not just because of the great acting and the wonderful storylines and the directing, but also you remember the scenes, how they looked, and the location as well. This helped inspire so many other films too, including most famously The Dark Knight, that really, really great film That was the middle film of the Dark Knight trilogy, of the Batman trilogy. That's the one that showcased Gotham pretty much unlike anything else ever seen before. And it was heavily, heavily influenced from that film. Number 14 is this. Another thing that makes this film stand out to this very day. It's something else that's more of an analysis, almost like a theory of sorts. Is this the characters, especially both the robbers and the main hero, they are expertly fleshed out to showcase their vices and how those vices eventually lead to their downfall. I mean, you have to look closer, but you can see that information. For example, there's Neil Macaulay's obsession with professionalism. Like he sees things as being another challenge, especially escalating challenges. There's that line where he says, the bank is worth the risk. Like he knows that it's a more higher challenge, but he loves that stuff. He's wanting to take it on. And professionalism when it comes to finishing things, such as trying to do things with Raingrow. Like, in other words, not letting him just go. He just has to go to that hotel and then kill him, but ultimately that leads to his own downfall. And then there's Val Kilmer's character, Chris, who had his own obsession slash vice with gambling. It's alluded to a little bit. You don't really hear too much on it, but it does showcase here and there. But yes, apparently he was a gambling addict, and he was basically using these robberies, these scores, to fuel his next payday. But of course, he would lose them in terms of gambling, and then he would have to do it yet again. Then there's Tom Sizemore's character, Michael Chirito, who had an obsession slash passion for action. There was an interesting bit I read about from Michael Mann that stated that Michael Chirito, actually, his character used to have a cocaine habit, like it was some drug habit, but he kicked it, but he needed more action to substitute things. In fact, there's that famous line where he says, for me, the action is the juice. So for him, he just wanted to go on whatever was like Joker famously said, like a dog chasing cars. Like that's him. And so in his case, it ultimately led to his downfall because he didn't necessarily need anything as far as the money. I believe there was that scene too where it's described that he's got vast amounts of money built up from those robberies, but he has to have that action, and so that ultimately leads to his death. And then there's Vincent Hanna's, the main character slash hero's own obsession and passion, and that has to do with being the workaholic, working around the clock, making sure that he has to finish the case. He has to make sure that the bad guy is caught, but that leads to the demise of his own family's situation, his marital status, and then what happened to his stepdaughter as well. So expert analysis stuff, like how the film showcases these vices and leading to people's downfall. Number 15 is this. There was a time period a couple years back where there was going to be a video game adaptation of the movie. It was going to be developed by Gearbox Software. Few details, though, have been released on there because it seems like it never really even got past a certain stage. Like maybe the IP was there, but there's no indication about what type of game it was going to be. Like whether it was going to be a linear single shooter type game or if it was going to be more of like an open sandbox type game. Who knows? But the developers there at Gearbox, I believe it was the president, stated that they had everything ready to go. They were passionate about it. They had a movie creator, in this case Michael Mann, that was also interested in this. The only thing that they didn't have was time. Apparently they all were working on different things at the same time, and they just couldn't get together to finalize it with the time that was needed. So ultimately, the Gearbox software developers decided to stop. They released the IP, and so that way it could be used by someone else. But as of today, there still hasn't been any official video game adaptation. How awesome would that be, though, right? Imagine if you could play as Vincent Hanna's character or Neil Macaulay's character, something along those lines. Number 16 is this. Another character that had a smaller role but still important was William Fincher's Roger Van Zant character. In his case, there was the idea that he had those bearer bonds that were stolen during the film's initial robbery. I believe it was like 1.6 million or so. If you don't know, bearer bonds, I had to look up a little bit of info myself. These are bonds that are basically owned by whomever holds them. So kind of like cash. Like if you have a $20 bill in your hand, that cash is yours. You pass it to me, that cash is mine. That's the anonymous way that bearer bonds are used. And it's this anonymity that causes it to easily have someone maintain and then transfer large amounts of money with small amounts of paper. Again, anonymously. That's why they were very attractive at a certain time. They're rare now, though, because they've been, for lack of a better term, discontinued. This ease and anonymity caused a lot of money laundering, so lots of places and so on just stopped issuing them and utilizing them. But what's interesting about Roger Van Zant is that his character, if he truly would have just followed through with buying back those stolen bonds and then claiming the insurance claim at the same time, he could have made lots more money, right? When it came to the original $1.6 million amount. Who knows what the insurance amount would have been, but ultimately he would have been able to score a much larger amount. But his greed or his revenge, whatever was dominating things more for him, told him that he wanted to take out Neil Macaulay's character and his crew, and that ultimately led to his downfall. He would still be alive, right, if he would have just gone along with the score afterward. Number 17 is good news for you fans out there for Heat. There's this. Just recently released, there was a new novel done by Michael Mann and another author, and it's called Heat 2. And it's set both in a weird way as a prequel and a quote-unquote sequel to the original film's timeline. So, in other words, there's the film universe in 1995, the original one, and then this new novel covers the time before that and then the time after that. And what it does is it further fleshes out the characters, the main characters involved within the film itself. And the intention is this. Michael Mann stated that he made the book to eventually put it either on film or maybe even TV. So there's going to be something hopefully happening soon that'll showcase that, and then that way there will be finally another entry within the world of Heat. Number 18 is this. At one point, whenever the film, I believe, was going to make its debut on television on NBC, instead of having a fantastic 17 extra minutes added as a special extended viewing edition, much like the, I believe it was the original Superman film, whenever it made its TV debut, it had like 40-something minutes extra added as a special. In this case, Michael Mann was willing to add 17 and make it like a 3 to 4 hour showing of the film. How amazing that would have been, right? Now, instead, NBC decided to remove 40 minutes of the film. That way they could show it in a smaller timeline. And this, of course, made the director Michael Mann mad. So much so, in fact, that he disowned it, not using his name with the showing, and ultimately it's been regarded as the worst version of the film in and of itself. How I wish there would have been those 17 extra minutes on there, because that would have been something that would have been seen earlier, showcasing all those beautiful deleted scenes in the film itself. Number 19 is this. This is pretty interesting stuff when it comes to a real-life apartment. Danny Trejo's character, his death scene still lives on. Here's what I mean. The apartment that was used for his character's real-life living domicile location, well, at the end of the movie, or near the end of the movie, when his character is almost dead at that point after being confronted by Waingro and his associates and then left for dead. There's that scene where Neil Macaulay comes up to him, and then there's that pool of blood, obviously showcasing that he's been mortally wounded. Well, it turns out that pool of blood, the fake blood, actually seeped into the carpet and then into the wood underneath it as well. In fact, some of the current residents decided to check it out. They pulled up that carpet, and lo and behold, they found parts of the theatrical blood still there, like pooled within the wood itself. How interesting, right? That's the exact spot then where Danny Trejo's character was essentially there through the last moments of his life, and you could see it right there, right in front of you. Neat stuff when it comes to that. And then finally, number 20 is this. There's that very, very brief scene involving a TV console man, as he was described. He was someone that eventually told one of the detectives that he overheard someone using the word slick, which was pretty neat when you think about it, because that led to one of the robbers, in this case Michael Chirito's character, being identified later on. If it wasn't for that tiny little word, who knows what might have happened. Well, as it turns out, that character, that console TV man, was a real homeless man that was around that area. So whenever there was some producers / scout agents, people that were there trying to look at the location, he happened to come across them. He must have made an impression on them, because they decided to give him that very, very small cameo. In fact, his presence in and around that location or that area involved him actually being with that very same TV that you see. He would showcase it around certain stores, like in the back, and then they would allow him, the friendly store owners, to plug it into some extension cords, and that way he would have power to watch his TV. So next time you see the movie, just realize that that was a real homeless person that was somehow found just by pure happen chance and then featured within that film. And then that's it. That's pretty much it. 20 things you didn't know about Heat. Let me know in the comments below what you guys and gals think. Anything else I might have missed that's interesting, post those comments below. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.